Welcome to a special KPLE program. This is a continuation of a program last week that hopefully you watched, but even if you didn't, they will stand alone. We will lay a foundation again, but I'm Robin Durham, your host, and with me in the studio today is Dr. William Hope Taylor. Welcome, Hope.
Thank you very much, Robin. Again, it's a great privilege and honor to be here with you and with your audience. Thank you.
It's a blessing to have you. You've been in a few times, and you know, we always are focused on the nation. We're always focused on shifting the nation back to its biblical roots and releasing, in a sense, a biblical worldview for the issues that we are facing, and just to you know, plant within the hearts of people that are called by His name, that actually have the authority in the earth to make a change. Yeah. You know, we're living in an hour that government does not necessarily have the answers.
Yes. Yes.
Economists don't necessarily have the answers. And God is giving opportunity for the church to step up in some areas, and we have people within the church, and we have connections with people that are able to bring a biblical worldview in all of the areas, in a sense, that are shaking in our nation today.
Yes.
And I want to share just a little bit about Hope. He is the founder and president of the International Leadership Embassy in Washington, D.C., works with leaders in civil government, churches, local communities with a mandate to educate, engage, and empower with a biblical worldview while implementing strategies to transform America. His background was a pastor for over 20 years, a church planter, and now he's involved in many apostolic councils, you know, economic one that I'm aware of, and spends much time in Washington, D.C., and you know, it's a blessing because God has just really captured your heart for the nation, and He has taken you on a journey.
Yes.
You know, that is about to take on yet a fuller form of what has been in God's heart.
Yes. Yes.
And that is something called Hope for America.
Robin, I was thinking this morning about, and I was looking back, and my, as you mentioned, journey with Christ. I became a believer as a late teenager out of the world system, drug culture, etc. Came into Christ and radical transformation, and you know, began passionately following Christ as a teenager. So then, as I look back from then until now, what I see is this: that God's pattern is to plant seeds in you. And those seeds are planted in good soil, and then they're nurtured. But that seed begins to spring up, and it looks like a certain thing. Well, if you stop there, you stagnate. You always have to move forward in God.
Yes.
There's a good friend of mine, Native American brother, who has a saying, always go forward, never look back. And I love that, just a simple, just always be looking forward. So I think in God, as I look back at our journey, here's what I saw was there was a constant adding to. The Lord would continue to add to and develop, if you will, or peel off another layer and begin to define your assignment. So we feel like 2016 is a year that God is doing that. We know that's happening in our world, and we're seeing it happening in many. We can just touch real quickly. If you look at Brexit, what just happened in Europe, what was that? That was a major turning point. So reset is what it was. Major. So we think we're in a season in God of resetting, that God is doing that for many people. So in our assignment and what God's given us to do, we believe this year that the Lord is saying to dig deeper and begin to, and the phrase I like to use is build out or build infrastructure. On one of our assignments, of course, the name of our organization is called International Leadership Embassy, of course, but underneath that, the assignment now has to do with, and the phrase is Hope for America, which we talked about. So we feel like God's saying, build that out. And here's maybe something that can help your listeners here is this. For about 2 years, we carried that, and somewhat in a seed form. But, you know, God began to open up the Word to us, show us things in His Scriptures. And we began to see that now it's time to move beyond just a message to develop some methodology that by God's grace, Robin, by God's grace, and that's the way I want to say this, not because of me, but by God's grace, that it will become a movement. And I don't mean that in any other way than I believe at the foundational level of America, if we can rewrite at a foundational level the conscience of America to look at things from a hopeful perspective instead of a hopelessness perspective, I would say we would call that success if at a very foundational level if we can do that. So we feel like to get to that, we have to build infrastructure. We have to build. And what that means is we have to partner with those. And so here in Texas, of course, in your region, we love coming here in Fort Hood and Killeen. We love, and we just don't overlook the fact that God has planted us here in this time to take this next step here in your, so that means a lot to me that we're here to do that. And so it's about finding people that carry the burden for the nation and then being able to connect with them to help them at a local level begin to say, how can we begin to insert again the message of hope? And there's so many ways, you know, there's hundreds of ways you can look at this. I would like to say to pastors, take a second look at your messages. Look at the messages that you're ministering. What is the underlying current? What's beneath that? What's the foundation? Don't look at the topic, look at the foundation. Is it a message of hope in there? And are you speaking that? Are you, putting that, if you will, into the soul of those that are attending your congregation? Are you working in the city? Are the programs in the city done from a perspective, we're going to instill hope in our young people. We're going to instill hope in our government leaders, our city leaders. Or are we always just fighting against negative things? Are you following me?
Yes.
So we believe this is a year to build infrastructure, to partner, find those that we can partner with. And again, as we said before, I don't think, Robin, that our nation's challenges get solved from Washington, D.C. Our president, no matter who it is or who it will be, has only limited amount of ability, capability to do that. So we can't look at that person. I believe scripturally it comes back to you, it comes back to me, believers in the body of Christ, to be able to be a difference at our local community. So we're looking at that, how to build infrastructure, how to partner with people in regions and territories. And again, our first digging in and serious look has to do with your state, with Texas, and finding regions where people carry something for their city, their community, and they see this needs to change. And so we want to come alongside them. We want to come alongside them with, if you will, some prayer support, but also anything, wisdom God will give us from His Word, any prophetic things God may give us, and bring some strategies that can, again, rewrite the script for cities and for communities, and obviously for individual lives.
Yes, yes. That it is what you have to look for. You have to look for the redemptive gift in a person. You can easily see negatives if you want to, but if you want to look beyond and listen and dig deeper, you will hear destiny, even if they're in a very negative place. If they're in a hopeless place, you'll still hear a heart, and you'll still hear literally a passion in what it was created for, what it beats for. And if you're able, if you're trained to look that way, you're able to speak to that and draw that out, and people will aspire to that which you draw out. I've seen it over and over. I have to give Graham Cook a lot of credit. Graham shifted the thinking of many warrior, intercessor, battle type believers, which I am one. I'm an intercessor, and with that you can get negative. But he began to teach us and to train us to shift and begin to look at what God put there. And even in a city, even in city leaders, listening to and just being circumspect again. We used that word last time, being wise, being alert, and looking at how can we encourage, how can we pull forth, because that's what we're here for. If we're leaders, we are here to pull forth the best out of people, right? Absolutely. And so it's the same for a city, and it's the same for a state. I've found that regions have a redemptive purpose. In this region, we found out several years ago that when this area was settled, it literally had a base camp of 300 people, when when culture or civilization was coming in through Nova Scotia, the south or northwest, and up through the Yucatan, that this happened to be a base where stone was quarried, and it was fashioned into arrowheads, axe heads, spear heads, and farm implements.
Wow.
And people, it was a transient area, and people came through. They were equipped with weaponry, and they were also equipped with tools of harvest. So my heart, I'm telling you, you know, thousands of years ago, this was exactly the destiny of this region. And, you know, in the 40s, someone stood in the Gatesville area, Fort Gates, and looked down and felt that this would be a good little swatch of land to put the largest military base in, you know, the nation and the world, where people do come in, and there is a base camp of permanent party, we call it, that can be called to equip with the tools that they need for both the warfare that they'll have to do and the harvest that they'll be bringing in. So that's destiny of a city. And if you look deeply, we've lived in enough places, I've lived in enough places to know there is a destiny. And lots of times you'll see the negative manifesting in the earth that you must look beyond. So took us on a little trail.
No, can I just, can I get off of the grid and look at something from a total, let me give you an example of something that so ties in, Robert, just strong within my heart. Yesterday, I'm a football fan, and so I like NFL, I like college, and I track with it year-round, whether there are games or not. I saw a very inspiring story yesterday that goes to your point. It was a story of Coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers, Mike Tomlin, and his story, and they had taken a journalist and camera and gotten in a vehicle and gone back to where Coach Tomlin was from. And he shows, you know, the housing, and he tells about his mom and dad. There was a separation, and family lived. He showed the house that he lived in. It was his grandmother's house. He and his mom, and I think one other brother lived there. And it took him a while for her to be able to get to a place where she could get her own apartment. And it was just a very simple apartment, if you follow me. A very simple surrounding, a little simple playground. But and now he's a coach of the Steelers, and an awesome, awesome guy, an example. But what was so impressive about that was this. As he talked about when they showed the photograph of the home where his grandma lived, he said, you know, my grandmother always talked to me like there was something inside me. And boy, you're going to do something with your life. You've got something. And he said, you know what? She convinced me that I could. So it's a case in point of, on a real practical level, somebody that many of us would know today that's come from less than ideal economic or family or probably cultural situations, you know, with the separated parents, etc., all those things that can be involved in that. And yet somebody saw something to begin to call that destiny out of him. And you look, so it's a great success story today. Great success story that, again, for me, goes back to what did Grandma do? Grandma planted seeds of hope in his heart that caused him to be able to come up above all of the things that could have put him down.
And when, you know, when we look at, as you were saying, when we look at destiny of a nation, you know, which is what we're talking about, and understanding and researching why we were founded, and we don't have to go into that. David Barton and so many of you are well aware. But, you know, we call the nation back to the potential, to the destiny for the arm of God and the voice of God that it was destined to be to the earth. And, you know, we can again inspire hope, and that's what you're talking about with sometimes. I want you to share a little of your biblical references on instilling hope and the direction that people can take as we really begin to pray about this and think about it and want to possibly affect the hospital that we work in, or the government official that happens to live next door to you, your mayor, whatever. Go ahead.
Well, let's just look for a moment at what's going on, what's in our news right now. Let's just take a moment and look at some of those things of people losing their life, protest, terrorism, and then behind the backdrop that Most of us, don't want to pull the curtain and look what's behind, but then you have the whole economic situation and much instability there, and a lot of very smart people that are watching that. Christians from a kingdom biblical view are saying, hey, wait a minute, don't get rocked to sleep in terms of economics and where. So if you look at all of those things, the pressing things as well as the things that are behind the curtain, that are challenges for us, again, what it says to us is there's a need in our nation, and there's a need for somebody to stand up and provide some answers, right? So what I see in communities, Robin, is in some of the black communities, in some of the impoverished communities, I see a strong man of hopelessness that's operating. Now, when you go to Scripture, you go to the book of Proverbs, very, very simply, very clearly it says that hope deferred, which basically means that it's postponed, it's put off, it's just beyond your reach to grasp. It's not something you can get your hands on. You can't put your hands on the handle of it. You can't incorporate it. You can't make that part of who you are. Somehow or another, you can't put hope as a template over your life and the story of your life. You just can't connect those things. So that's hope deferred, is what that is. So I think individuals have that, and I think communities carry that. And so what happens, and it goes on and it says, what it does is, when that's a reality, it says it makes the heart sick, book of Proverbs. And what that means is that our heart, as we all know, if that doesn't function, we don't function. That's our core being. That's where we give life, and it pumps our blood, etc. The point is, at the core of who we are, the core of who communities are, if there's hope deferred, if hope is not written into the script in people's minds and their emotions, then they now find themselves in a place of hope deferred. Well, out of that is going to come all kinds of attempts to fill the void. Anger, et cetera, begin to pour out of that. So then you end up with some of the challenges that we have today. It goes back again to a lack of hope. So hopelessness. So again, I want to just emphasize that I believe, as I'm hearing the Lord, that we have to look beyond, look behind the screen, if we will look beyond just the surface things. What are the root causes? And I think that there's a root cause here of hopelessness that is trying to grip our nation. And so I want to be counted among a choir of voices that will stand up and sing a song of hopefulness, that by the grace of God, not because of me, you, but by God, by the grace of God, the communities, families can look toward tomorrow with a sense of hopelessness. And again, I would say it at a foundational level, that people can begin to see, I want to see the future through the filter of hope, not hopelessness. So last year, I think it was, Robin, over in the book of Acts, and I'll just take just a moment, go to that passage 27, where the Apostle Paul had made his appeal to go to the civil authority, of course, and Caesar. And so they're placed on a ship. And it begins to talk about the passages, and here's what it says. It talks about the winds coming against them and all of the challenges we're having, and I won't read all of those verses, but it just talks, several times it talks about now the winds became even stronger. They got even stronger, etc. And so you see this building against them. And even to the point it says that, in one verse it says that all hope was going to be destroyed. So they were on the brink. They were on the thin edge between living and dying. They were on that thin edge between, are we going to make it back? Are we going to see our families again? Let's just make it real practical. Are we going to make it till tomorrow, or is this it for us? Is our life over? And here they are, 276, I believe there was, out on the ship. And this was real. This was not theory. This was not abstract. This is real for these people. And again, it says, they came to that place to where all hope was gradually abandoned. And basically it means that, again, the thin thread of hope that exists, that I believe God puts within us as an appetite for hope, was like just, they were losing the grip on that very thing. And then it goes on to say, in one of the verses it said, verse 22 and 33, it says, this again is the Apostle Paul. Now he's on the ship, he's the prisoner, but he's on the ship, and he said, for this very night an angel of God, of the God to whom I belong and whom I serve, stood before me. And it goes on, verse 24, saying, do not be afraid, Paul, you must stand before Caesar. And then he goes on and he says, don't lose your courage. So as I began to see that, Robin, what I saw was a picture that so let's back up for just a minute, the challenges we're having. Let's look at families losing loved ones. Let's look at situations in the different states where we've seen people lose their lives. Let's look at what just happened in Dallas. Let's look at what happened just recently in France. All of these things we can, and so we're on a ship. We're on a ship, and these things are coming against us, and they're devastating. And only by the grace of God can families. I read even this morning the account of it was a father, I think he was 51 years of age, and I think it was 10 or 11-year-old son who was killed in the terrorist attack in Paris, in France, nice France, just yesterday. And I thought, my God, how devastating can that be to have to overcome that? So you think of all of those things and these things coming against people, but there's a turning point in the story. There's a turning point in this record of all ages to read. And it says that verse I just read, but the man of God, if you will, God's representative, who was on the ship too, by the way, stood up and had something to say in the midst when everybody else was saying everything is gone, we're losing our life. And I see that as a vivid picture for where we are in our nation, that the body of Christ, individuals can be spokespeople to stand up in the midst of the storms that we're having and say, but wait a minute, yes, these things are terrible, yes, they're overcoming, yes, they're overwhelming, it's devastating, but God has spoken something. And so, Robin, quite honestly, sometimes can be overwhelmed too by the challenges we have, but there's something in this passage of a truth that wasn't just then, but is applicable to today, that there's a representative that God has in the earth or in a city, in Killeen, Fort Hood, wherever it is, Washington, D.C., that can say, but wait a minute, God has spoken something to me, and God has said, keep your courage. And several times in there it says, keep your courage. So what I see is this: we cannot afford to cash in our hope. We can't afford to do that, because if we cash that in, of course, we lose our courage. We lose our courage. We may still be breathing, but we're not living anymore. So as a nation, this is a great passage for us to say, and it's so interesting to me that at the very end of that story, it says they made it. Of course, the ship hit land, and it just begins to go apart, and people are just doing whatever they can do. But I love this part of the story, Robin. It says in the latter part of that chapter that everybody made it. Everybody survived, just like God told them. Everybody's going to, and they made it. Why? Because some of them literally made it because they were holding on to pieces of the ship.
To wreckage.
Yeah, to wreckage. So what I see in that is, if we, the church, can be a voice of hope into the nation in times such as this, that if we can somehow or another communicate that and build that into communities, put that in the foundation of where people live today, that if people could just get a piece of that in their life, you know what? They will make it. They'll get to their destiny. They will not die at sea. They will make it. So for me, it is about the destiny of the nation, and it's about, at a foundational level, getting the message into the soul, if you will, of the body of Christ, as well as the community.
On a practical level, I hear the overarching message, and it is, God is the only answer. We have man in all of his finest wisdom and intellect has gotten us right where we are.
Yeah.
Without God.
Yes.
And I was thinking, I know you went to Ferguson. You went up to Ferguson. So on a practical level, on the ground where there is hopelessness, what are some steps that people can take? And share just a little bit about what you encountered when you went to Ferguson.
Well, I wasn't actually in Ferguson. I was in Baltimore.
Oh, Baltimore.
Baltimore, yeah. I didn't actually go to Ferguson. I was in Baltimore.
That's right.
Yeah, but I think what I experienced there was and I've told the story, Robin, before, but it was one of and having had the privilege of going to other nations, and I've been to some very impoverished nations, West Africa and some of the, the river areas in Africa, and just very, very impoverished, a very simple kind of lifestyle. And it was really my honor to be there and to go there. But I got to tell you this, that the overwhelming sense that I felt when I was there was, again, and we tend to see things through the filter of what God's saying to us, was this thing of hopelessness. That's what I saw, was that. That's what I felt, so strong. And it really gripped me. And I said, Lord, how do we turn this? How do we turn this? I'm encouraged that just yesterday I was on a conference call with some leaders. And one had just come from that area. And there's a mobilization of pastors, of leaders in the church, community leaders that are coming together. And they're doing some very practical things that I think if this continues to build itself out, if it's effective in building itself out, and really gets mature in its expression, it can be a game changer. It can, again, rewrite the script for some of the people and the communities there. So I think if you want to look at principles, I think it's a matter, as we talked about in our first session, it's a matter of working with those that we can partner with it. God gives us grace to be able to work with, Robin. And that means, you know, pastors with pastors, et cetera, et cetera. But it also means pastors are with business leaders, or in your case, you know, those in the military or in civil government. We've got to move beyond the...
we have about 2 minutes
We got to move beyond, okay, the platform of just staying within our own confines. We got to begin to work. So I think we have to do that, and I think we have to look at how practically can we serve people in our community. What wisdom can we bring? Identify the problem, bring the solution to it in the name of Christ, working together, and I think we can turn some cities, and I think we can turn some communities.
If we're watching, I believe, and if we're listening, and I do have a vantage point being here and doing a program where I'm listening to leaders, not just mostly church leaders, but government leaders as well. You know, you do hear those that will be able to gather, you know, and again, that we're at a place where out of such dire need, people are awakening, you know, and there's a willingness. There's a willingness, and you know, the issues and the hopelessness, the despair, the poverty that you encountered, it is a reality, and those are the practical things that the church has to address and be a part of in whatever way that we can. And you know, just connecting with, there was a huge gathering in Killeen last night. We had some shootings over the last several weeks, and thousands gathered, you know, or 1,000, I think it was, gathered and came in and wanted to discuss with the chief of police just the things that were on their heart. We saw even last night on television our president listening to the concerns of citizens of the United States. So, you know, a big part is the connecting, the listening, and to seeing how we can come together and what piece and what part we can play. Our time is up. Hope, I always enjoy having you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. My privilege. Thank you.
And thank you for watching. God bless you.